On today's episode of Locked On Wild, 3 things that we take away from the win over Columbus, including a decisive Philip Gustafson and the second line doing the little things.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we deploy our 3 things approach to John Hynes postgame after the win against Columbus. We'll talk about the second line. We'll talk Marcus Johansson in particular as well. And we'll finish by talking about Philip Gustafson and his debut for the upcoming season. My name is Seth Toupal, credentialed Wild media member, host of Locked On Wild, and as mentioned, a 3-2 win for the Minnesota Wild. Far from perfect, but first game of the season, and it's better to get the 2 points in that situation than to not. So obviously a lot that can be tuned up as the season unfolds, but there was a lot to like from what we saw in the opener. And John Hynes talked in particular about what the second line brought to the table. And so that is where we are going to start things here for today's episode.
That second line, just a menace out there. How excited did you see that chemistry?
Yeah, really good. I think that, as you said, they were a difference in the game tonight. And I thought they played strong. I thought Johansson was moving his feet and playing a speed game. And Boldy and Eck were using their size and playing quick and playing the power forward type of game. So it was nice to see that click.
A couple of things that stood out to me amongst the obvious performance. You've got the Matt Boldy no-look goal that kind of starts the scoring, but I think the thing to key in on for that goal was the screen that Joel Eriksson set on Elvis Merzlikins that allowed Boldy to find a window that Elvis was not able to look through. You saw him react so late to the point that he kind of was looking around, and as soon as he turned, he saw the puck. And so that goal probably doesn't happen without the ability of Joel Eriksson to sit in front and to clog those sight lines for Elvis Merzlikins. Little things that led to that goal. On the Joel Eriksson goal, it was a situation where Columbus had taken control of the puck. They were trying to move it out of their end and push it up ice to try for a rush. Matt Boldy able to get to the puck to keep it in the zone, and then a nice little sidestep move to avoid a Blue Jackets player and keep the puck in the zone. He then gets it to Marcus Johansson, and we'll talk about Marcus Johansson more specifically in segment 2, but Johansson heads towards the net. Joel Eriksson is there on the other side, and it's a nice feed across the way to be able to get it to Joel Eriksson for the goal. And so all told, 2 goals for that second line, and they really were the ones that drove the play pretty much the entirety of this game. But little things. I mean, not only was Matt Boldy really pushing play aggressively while he was out there, I think the thing that stood out to me was just how much he was battling along the boards as well, trying to win those puck battles and trying to keep possession alive, because it seemed like every time that second line was out there, they were in the offensive zone. And that's no coincidence as to why John Hynes deployed them to start off all 3 periods in this game. Strong play in the first leads to that Boldy line being used to start the second. Strong play in the second leads to the Boldy line being deployed to start the third. And so really felt like they were the engine that drove the bus in this game pretty much from start to finish. And you go back to a couple of seasons ago when Johansson was acquired by the Minnesota Wild and stepped into that line, and him and Eriksson Ek and Matt Boldy all just took off down the stretch. This is what the Wild were looking for to try to rekindle some of that magic, because you've got Joel Eriksson Ek, who's the get to the net guy. You've got Matt Boldy, who is a dynamic scorer and can shoot from kind of that intermediate area. But the key that is going to make this line really hit a different level is if Marcus Johansson is using his speed and is an active participant to be able to turn that into a line that features all those elements you're looking for in a quality scoring line. It's one game, but that was, I think, one of the better games that we've seen from Marcus Johansson over the last couple of seasons. He did have a nice one-timer attempt that he could not connect on. It was a nice feed from, I believe, Matt Boldy to Johansson, who was waiting, who was ready, but just could not connect on the shot. Otherwise, that might have been a third goal, and maybe you're looking at all three guys getting onto the score sheet for line two. But it's all about, and I think this is something that we'll talk more specifically about in segment 2. It's all about getting everybody participating actively on a line. You can't have two guys that are doing their thing and another guy that just is kind of there and occupying a spot. And so whether it be Marcus Johansson continuing to hold that spot down with performances like we saw last night, whether it be somebody else that gets an opportunity and steps in and takes hold and doesn't let go, that is going to be what helps that line really hit that next level and to be able to just continue these types of performances. Now, it is interesting because the statistical numbers don't paint a super friendly picture for really any line for the Minnesota Wild other than the third line. And so you look at some of these different performance metrics. I mean, the Corsi 4 percentage for the Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Johansson line was an even 50%. Foligno, Hartman, and Trennan, their Corsi 4 percentage was 36.4, but their expected goals percentage was 80%. And so that is going to require, I think, a little more further evaluation as to exactly why that was that way. But then you look, Kaprizov, Rossi, Zuccarello, Corsi 4 percentage at 28.6. Lauko, Goudreau, Huznadinov, 58.3. So that was something that we keyed in on pretty quickly in the game, was that it seemed like lines 2 and 4 were the ones that were pushing play in a positive direction, and 1 and 3 just were more on the quiet side. And so that's going to be something to keep an eye on here as the season progresses. But all told, for the second line, they had 11 minutes, 48 seconds of ice time together, 13 on-ice shots attempts for, 13 on-ice shot attempts against, which is why the Corsi numbers were at an even 50%. They were responsible for the 2 goals and were not scored upon in the game. And so they did some really good things, but I think it all comes down to the little things and continuing to push the play and to just try to keep attacking in waves to lead to goals. Put pressure on the defense by being in the zone leads to more shot attempts. More shot attempts leads to more goals. So a good debut for line 2, but I think it all keys in on all 3 members of that line being active participants. And so we will transition from talking specifically about line 2 to talking about the participant that I think was the most pleasant surprise, because we knew Joel Eriksson Ek is going to continue to do his thing. We expect to see a bit of a step up from Matt Boldy this year. He delivered on night 1, most pleasant surprise, at least through the first game of the season, was what Marcus Johansson added to that mix. And so we'll hear some of John Hines' thoughts on Marcus Johansson, and we'll break down all of the particulars as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Indeed. We are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Plus, listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we, of course, have you covered tomorrow as the Minnesota Wild will be hosting the Seattle Kraken at XL Energy Center. We'll have you pre and post for that one, and we will also be recording a crossover preview of that game as well with Erica L. Ayala of Locked On Kraken. We'll get the intel on the start of the Dan Bylsma era for the Seattle Kraken. So look forward to all of that. And then Sunday's game on the road against Winnipeg, we'll have you covered as well for that one. So first weekend of the season getting off to a flying start, and Locked On Wild's got you ready to rock. Let's turn our attention to Marcus Johansson more specifically, because there were some things that Johansson did in last night's game that we just flat out didn't see consistently last year. And I think that is something that is only going to help that Matt Boldy and Joel Eriksson-Ek combination if it's done on a regular basis. If we go back to, seeing this once every 13, 14 games, that's not going to cut it. And John Hines talked exactly about that in last night's postgame.
Johansson said that it's kind of a revenge year for him. He felt like he was very off last year in the series looking to change. What kind of conversations have you guys had with him, if any, in order to remind him, yes, let's have a big bounce back here?
Well, we had quite a few, at the end of the season, and then he's come back, with the fresh mindset, knows how he needs to play, what we expect him to do, and I thought he had the last couple of games of the preseason, you could see the competitive nature coming up. I mean, he's such a great skater, and he has the ability to make plays, but there are times in the games where you have to be, in battles and win battles and stay on pucks and things like that. And I think he's making a concerted effort to do that. So that's what we need from him. And when he does them, then he's a productive player, because he's certainly smart and skilled and can make plays. But you got to combine that with the hard part of the game, and he's done a nice job of it.
There were two plays in particular in last night's game where Johansson took the puck, blistered through the neutral zone into the Columbus side of the ice. One of them, he took the puck on the left side, went around behind the net and tried for a wraparound goal, which was only thwarted because of a good piece of stick work by one of the Blue Jackets defenders. But then on another in the third period, similar kind of situation, and we all saw how the game unfolded, that Columbus really started to pick up the action in the second period. They continued that in the third, and it just felt like they were doing a much better job of getting into the offensive zone and getting shots on net. Wilds, it was really back and forth in the first period, and it seemed like the final about 5 minutes of that game, of that period, the Wilds started to really it was fun to watch that final five of period one, because it was just all four lines were just continuing to just heap the pressure on, and Columbus got really pinned down on their side of the ice in that final five. But that's 5 minutes out of a 60-minute hockey game. And if you don't continue to really, if you allow yourself to kind of take your foot off or to not be really full bore the entire game, you can see what easily happens. In Columbus, second period, they controlled pretty much exclusively. Third period, the Wilds were able to get some of that fight back. But in the third period, there was another instance in which Marcus Johansson got the puck and he took it straight through the Columbus defense. There was a big gaping hole in the middle of the neutral zone. He took it straight through, went right to the net. Yes, he did get intercepted from behind to the point that it was, I think I think there was an attempt at a shot, but I think it was a pretty easy save for Merzlikins. But again, the thing that I like to see is going to the net, because guess what? You can't score goals if you don't have the puck and head to the net with purpose. I mean, yeah, you can score from outside, but your chances of doing so are far less likely if you attack from the perimeter than if you get to the net and really try to hunker down and to attack from that area. That's why they call those high danger attempts. The closer you get to the net, the higher percentage chance of danger there is for the opposing goalie. And so Johansson had two instances there. But, even on the Eriksson Ek goal, when Boldy gets him the puck, looking to crash the net, looking to attack to the front of the net area, and then when the defense stepped up to try to intercept him, finding Joel Eriksson Ek on the other side of the crease to be able to bury that goal. Those are the kinds of things that you want to see, because, Denny talked about this in the postgame last night, and it's 100% right on. It's that playing with that passion, playing with a little fire in your game. I don't question it really ever from Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Boldy, I think, really cranked his up in this game. It seemed like every time he was on the ice, he was just looking for the puck and trying to make plays. And so you've got two guys that bring that pretty consistently on that line. Johansson's been the big wild card. Last year, it just seemed like there were so many instances in which it was just uneven performance, and you don't see that attack mentality. And, if you look back at Johansson's career stats, he's never been a huge volume shooter, but he is more of an attack the net guy. And so if he can get back to that, to add that element in, getting into the zone with speed and going directly to the net, that is, I think, what's going to unlock this second line and to really make them effective. But don't overlook this either. Don't overlook the effect that potential loss of job has on people. If you hear rumblings that there's somebody that might be in the mix to take your position, whether it be on a team or in just the general workplace, if you catch any level of wind of that, your immediate reaction is, I'll show them. I'll show them that would be the biggest mistake that they could ever make. And so, I know Johansson is in the contract year, and so there's some tangible effect there. But don't overlook the threat of loss of spot in the lineup as another reason why we have seen the fire get lit a little bit more consistently over these last few games. Because the other thing, too, is there are a few puck battles in which Johansson went in pretty hard and pretty aggressively to try to retrieve the puck. And so those are the kinds of things that should be, that should be your floor. Is you're not going to score every night. As good as the second line played, there are going to be times throughout the season where it just doesn't work for a game or a few games. You hope that it doesn't become like a consistent, okay, it's been 15 games, we haven't seen anything from this line again. There are going to be nights where they don't score. But the key is, how are you impacting the game when you're not getting points on the scoreboard? And for me, continuing to attack is a great way to do that. So a good night for the second line, a good night for Marcus Johansson. That fire, keep pushing to the net, or somebody else will do the pushing for him. One of the other keys in last night's game was, I think, the play of Philip Gustafson. And John Hines also talked about what we saw from Gus, a little bit of what we saw from both goalies. And I have a perfect word to describe the Philip Gustafson experience from last night. We'll talk about that as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets as well, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. It doesn't even have to be a winner. You could have picked the Minnesota Wild outright in last night's game, and you would have come away with $200 in bonus bets. You could have picked the Columbus Blue Jackets, and hey, they didn't win, but you would be a winner because, again, win or lose, your first $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. So head to FanDuel.com right now to take advantage of this great offer. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Continuing our 3 things recap from last night's game against the Columbus Blue Jackets. And we got to talk about Gus Bus because he had a tremendous game last night. But I think the word that I used to describe his performance was decisive. Did a good job of just, not necessarily letting the puck play him, but deciding, okay, puck's right here. I'm just going to go get it. Loose puck to my right. I'm going to go poke it away from the opposing players. But let's hear a little bit of what John Hines thought of Philip Gustafson's game last night.
There was so much talk again with Gustafson needing to bounce back, and it just seemed like early on he was really attacking the puck, being strong on his skates, obviously, and then that last couple shifts. I mean, he just felt like that goal against didn't really rattle.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I thought the goal against, and he continued to battle. He made some. I thought both goaltenders made some key saves at key times tonight, and there gets to be a little bit of scattered hockey here early as you go through. I thought both goalies played really well. Gus, in particular, looked confident, poised, competitive, was in the right frame of mind, and that's the type of goalie he can be. Where I thought he fought through traffic and rebounds and did a good job in those situations. But I also thought he made some saves that when we had breakdowns, some point blank plays, he was reading the play and he was there and he was on time to make the save.
Yeah, I like that from Hines. That it seemed like Gustafson was much more. Again, I go back to decisive, and I like the notion in there about reading screens and being able to fight through them, as opposed to kind of sitting back and trusting that your defensemen are going to do what they need to do, to get in the way of those types of shots. Put yourself in position to where you can make the play. And he had a couple of sprawling saves to keep the Blue Jackets at bay. Obviously, there was the big one that ended up being the deciding goal, the goaltender interference, which, as I talked about on the SodaPod live stream with Isha, that's one of those that you can make a case either way for that call. The Wilds benefited from it, but Philip Gustafson didn't allow the Blue Jackets, especially in the final minute when they were starting to get some extra attacker chances. He didn't allow them to get back into the game. All told, for Philip Gustafson, his expected goals against last night was 2.84. He ended up giving up 2 actual goals, so he was 0.84 goals above expected. This is a number in which Minnesota Wild goalies have struggled with over the last few seasons in particular, is the goals saved above expected. It seems like both Philip Gustafson and Marc-Andre Fleury were in negative territory with this for all of last year and part of the year before. So the fact that Gustafson was able to face a pretty good torrent of shots, especially in periods 2 and 3, and to come out with the win is a good thing as well. But if you look at the breakdown on the shot attempts, 34 low danger shot attempts, 9 medium danger, and 3 high danger shot attempts. I know one of the goals that he gave up was right in front, and that's one where your defense needs to help you out a little bit when things get in that close. But other than that, with low and medium danger, he did a good job of keeping things at bay. And 20 blocks by the Minnesota Wild defensively as well was a good help for the Wild to keep some of them from even getting to Philip Gustafson. But look, we talked about in the offseason and in the lead up to the start of this year, this is a big season for Philip Gustafson because we are looking for the answer to the question, which one are you? Are you the goalie from a couple of seasons ago in which he was a sleeper pick for the Vezina? Or are you the goalie from last year who, I think the numbers were mostly buoyed down by 2 really bad months in last year's schedule, but inconsistency still rang out for Philip Gustafson throughout the year last year. Just pulling up the splits by month just to make sure and see if that is the case from what we saw last year. You look at a couple. I mean, the month of January in particular, a 4.42 goals against average and an 8.76 save percentage. Had a game against Arizona where he gave up 5, gave up 7 against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Beyond that, and the opening month, obviously, in which he had a 4.36 goals against average, 7 against Toronto, 5 against Columbus, and 6 against Philly. So beyond that, Gustafson's performance was not too far off. It wasn't as dynamic as 2 years ago, but it wasn't far off from the guy that he was. And so the big question that we're looking for is, which one are you? And I feel like he's closer to the 2 years ago version than he is last year, somewhere in the middle. But performances like this definitely remind you a little more of what we saw a couple of years ago than what we saw last year. But let's keep in mind, too, we talked about this in the postcast last night. The everydayers know that this was brought up. Philip Gustafson recorded a opening night shutout against the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers last year on opening night. And after that, like we said, gave up 7 to Toronto, 5 to Columbus, 4 to Edmonton, and 6 to Philadelphia. And then you can even go one start further when he gave up 5 to the New Jersey Devils. So that run right there is not great, but he did have some good starts that he put in, mixed in throughout the rest of the season. It just was 2 months that really buoyed that goals against average and dropped that save percentage down. So it's a good start for Gus. The key for him, I think, is going to be just to be decisive, to play the puck. Don't let the puck play you. And if he does that, and I think another thing that was brought up in the postcast last night is that he has come in better shape. That's going to help. It looks like all things, at least at this point, are pointing to a better season from Philip Gustafson here this year. But one game does not a season make. There's a lot more games that need to be played so that we can get some more data out there. And so we'll continue that process tomorrow. against the Seattle Kraken. But that is our episode here for today. Appreciate everybody tuning in as you do each and every day of the week. If you have not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow us on your favorite audio platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Locked On Wild has you covered with new episodes every Monday through Friday, as well as pre- and post-game content right here as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.